Hello everyone, DF here. Welcome to Beauties and Beasts, the podcast of all things Beauty and the Beast. Now, we're going to get a bit serious today. As if the pandemic wasn't enough to deal with, people are being extra nasty in this stressful time, with all the heightened stress of the quarantine. Problems that have been around for centuries are rising to the surface once again, one of them being racial violence, particularly from the authorities. Even with laws in place against systemic racism, it still exists. We've discussed in previous episodes that the Beauty and the Beast trope has been used to represent the struggles of interracial relationships, as once upon a time that sort of relationship was considered taboo. But there have been some instances where it was put in a negative light, or rather, a horrific one. I am referring to the 1933 film that sparked a lot of the monster movie tropes for decades to come. The original King Kong classic film of an oversized gorilla who falls in love with a beautiful human woman. You may all be familiar with the name King Kong, or may have seen the remakes, but if you've watched the original film from RKO Pictures, you'll find that under the surface, it serves as a depiction of how the white people in Hollywood viewed people who were different from them. And if you know your American history, it's not exactly subtle. Before I get into this, I'd like to thank my $5 plus patrons, Anime Guy 1101, Arvin Joshua Rocks 15, and TyrannosaurusVenom. I hope you enjoyed the extra YouTube content I've shared with you in the last month. If you didn't know, the $10 tier gets you early access to my pony music videos. And I know some of you haven't liked how I've been announcing premieres days in advance, but hey, if you don't like it, just pledge $10 a month to the podcast and you won't have that problem. Or if you're an aspiring writer, the $3 tier gets you access to my Writing Beauties miniseries on writing advice. My last episode was on dialogue. You can become a patron by clicking that green button or following the link in the description below. patron.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts. That's patron.podbean.com/beautiesandbeasts. Or buy merchandise on Redbubble featuring face masks. And if you want to fight against racism and LGBTQ plus oppression, I have a new intersectionalist design with the slogan "More Than Just Black and White," using the colors of the intersectionalist flag. And you can go to my Redbubble shop by following the link disneyfanatic23.redbubble.com, disneyfanatic23.redbubble.com. Alright, before I get into this, please be aware that this is an analysis and the political views expressed in the King Kong film do not reflect the views of this podcaster. Unlike most of the movies we review on here, King Kong wasn't adapted from any particular story, but has Beauty and the Beast themes. Allegedly, the idea came from director Marianne C. Cooper when he dreamt of a giant gorilla attacking New York City, and he just worked from there. He was also inspired by these Komodo dragons who were brought to the Bronx Zoo, once mythical, massive predators who quickly perished once they were caged. The movie opens with an old Arabian proverb, which was actually written by the director, not Arabian at all. And lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing. And from that day, it was as one dead. Foreshadowing of what's to come. The story opens in New York City, with film director Carl Denham, who is about to go on a ship to the jungle location for his latest film. But he needs a lead actress. He finds one in a very unexpected place. A pretty, blonde, homeless girl trying to steal from an apple cart, by the name of Anne Darrow, famously played by Fay Wray. Denham buys her a meal and offers her the lead part, because she has the right look. She is pretty, and very sad looking. So, because she has nothing left to lose, she hops onto the ship, the Venture. During the voyage, Anne meets slightly misogynistic first mate Jack Driscoll. At first claims the ship is no place for a woman, but ends up falling for her because it's Hollywood. Okay, I'll admit they are kinda cute, and the actors had really good on-screen chemistry, so I'll let the very quick romance slide. What most of the ship's crew didn't know was Denim was taking them to a secret island location known as Skull Island, for which he has the only map. There is a legendary entity on the island that the islanders worshipped, known as Kong. When they arrive on the island, the native people are performing a ritual sacrifice, and surprise, surprise, they are all black. Because of lack of credits, again, surprise, surprise, I can't verify if all the actors were actually African American, but the chief definitely was. I'm sure you know in the 1930s, one of the few roles people of color could get was primitive islander. The most obviously racist part of this movie, but moving on. The ship captain is able to translate, and the chief explains that the girl is being sacrificed as a bride of Kong, pointing to an extremely tall gate that is blocking the village from the jungle. Seeing Anne, he cries, "Oh, look at the golden girl," and offers to trade 6 of their women for her so that they can give Anne to Kong. Yeah, sure, because that's all native islanders do, traffic women, especially pretty white blonde ones. Yes, I'm aware some African cultures traded in slavery, but that doesn't excuse white people for their human trafficking crimes, and the way Native Africans treated their slaves was vastly different than how whites treated their African slaves. Anyway, Denim declines the offer, and the crew goes back to the ship. At night, the islanders sneak onto the Venture and kidnap Anne, because that's what they do, kidnap white women. I'm sorry, I hate it when people of color are presented as primitive, two-dimensional, animalistic villains. They perform a ritual surrounding Anne, and she is tied to 2 large columns behind the wall. Kong then emerges from the jungle, and turns out to be a 50-foot gorilla, and is instantly smitten with Anne, so he takes her into the jungle while she's annoyingly screaming her head off. The scary part of this movie is how unlike a gorilla Kong looks. In fact, his features are almost human, an ape-like human with a very dark face who kidnaps a blonde white woman. Okay, you see where I'm going with this, right? I'll just finish with the plot summary and then go back to the racial subtext. The men go after Anne, though they encounter several stop-motion dinosaurs, because why not? We already have a giant ape. Having dinosaurs there too makes perfect sense. Many men perish and are consumed by dinosaurs, even the ones classified as herbivores. Seriously, don't they know that dinosaurs, brontosauruses, don't eat meat? They are about to catch up to Kong when he shakes them off a log and they fall into a ravine. Only Denim and Jack survive. Denim, on one side, goes to get more help from the ship, while Jack goes on ahead. After defending Anne from a T-Rex and a plesiosaurus, Kong takes her back to his cave in the mountains, and then inspects her curiously, peeling off her clothes and tickling her. Yeah, the guy is very forward. Jack finds Anne and rescues her, and they race back to shore with Kong in hot pursuit. Denim is waiting on the beach with gas bombs and uses them to knock Kong out. And Denim is like, "Forget the movie, we've got the 8th wonder of the world here, we'll make millions!" And then they take Kong back to New York City and chain him up on stage for everyone to see, because that is just a brilliant idea. Bring a 50-foot tall killer ape back to New York City. By this time, Anne and Jack are engaged, but with the photographers flashing bulbs, Kong thinks that they are attacking Anne, and so he breaks free of his chains and goes on a rampage. He ends up killing several people, including blonde women that he mistakes for Anne, until he finds her in a hotel room, reaches in and carries her to the top of the Empire State Building. And so the famous scene where Kong fights off 4 military planes that shoot him down. As people gather around the massive ape body, the cop remarks to Denim that the airplanes got him. And Denim goes, "It wasn't the airplanes. It was Beauty that killed the beast." Now, let me fully explain the racist subtext of this film. See, in the 1930s, one of the excuses white people would use to oppress the blacks is that they were after their white women. Hence the stereotype that black men are all rapists. Even today, white women are intrinsically more afraid when they see a black stranger on the streets than they see a white one. Personally, I'd be wary around any strange man I meet on the streets. But even when a black person is simply minding their own business, carrying no weapons whatsoever, they are often assumed to be up to no good. And that's how incidents like George Floyd's murder happen. But going back to the 1930s, blacks were also perceived as savage, primitive, animalistic. Political cartoons presented them as more ape-like than white people. So when a giant ape is given a face similar to that of a black man, and the first thing he does is kidnap a white blonde woman, seems to be reinforcing the black rapist stereotype. Still not convinced? Take into account that Kong is then chained up and taken from his island home, and then put on display for people's pleasure. Same way that many blacks were chained up and stolen from their homes and objectified by the whites. Some of them, like Oda Benga, known as the Pygmy Man, were put on display like animals. So frankly, Kong's anger is justified, yet he's presented as a mindless killing machine. Same way that the blacks are presented as criminals when they are just fighting for their rights, even if they are protesting peacefully. A lot of people have demonized the Black Lives Matter movement due to the looting and riots that have broken out. I personally don't approve of violence of any kind, but people completely dismiss why the movement is even in place, why we're all angry, and yet even peaceful protests result in tear gas and SWAT teams. These are our fighter planes. Granted, the King Kong movie is very outdated, yet important in film history as it inspired countless monster movies, particularly the trope of a monster falling in love with and carrying off a girl, like Creature from the Black Lagoon, which I will cover in some future episode. Or simply monsters going on a rampage, like the famous Japanese Godzilla franchise. In fact, the creators behind Godzilla got the rights to use King Kong as a rival of Godzilla in some of their other films, the famous King Kong vs. Godzilla. So Kong is not just an American icon, but an international one. There have been many sequels and remakes of King Kong, even an animated musical adaptation, The Mighty Kong in 1998. The only reason to watch that version is Jodie Benson as a spunkier version of Anne, aka Ariel from The Little Mermaid. And it actually gives Kong a happier ending, as in he actually survives, not that he ends up with Anne. Because, let's face it, that probably wouldn't work out in the long run. But there were two big remakes. First was in 1976, which changed its story slightly to fit the time. Excuse me a second. Instead of a film crew going to an island, it's a research ship looking for oil. The love interests are changed to stowaway paleontologist Jack Prescott, played by Jeff Bridges, and shipwreck survivor Dwan, Jessica Lange. What kind of name is Dwan, though? I will say that I liked Dwan better than Fay Wray's Anne. She wasn't that smart, but she was quite the wisecracker and made me laugh a few times. Also not as much of a screamer. Seriously though, Fay Wray's main role in the original film was to fall in love with a guy, get kidnapped, and scream her head off. Like, at least try to run away when Kong leaves you alone. Also, Jack Prescott is much less of a jerk than Jack Driscoll, I will have to say. Dwan is also more sympathetic of Kong, though not interested in being more than friends because, well, he's a giant ape. Now, let's be realistic, it wouldn't be consensual. At least the ape in here was more realistic physically. This remake was okay, but I'd have to say the version I prefer most is Peter Jackson's 2005 remake, which is more in tribute to the original film. Of course, knowing Peter Jackson, as he was behind the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy, it's 3 hours long, and some parts drag, like the added spider scene deleted from the original film. But adds more to the characters. You see more of Anne, played by Naomi Watts in here, and her struggles as an actress and a single woman in the Great Depression. Jack Driscoll is also made into a playwright writing the film instead of the first mate, and he is a lot more of a gentleman. And the first mate is actually African American. Too bad he dies. And the Islanders are made a lot more vicious and primitive, which is actually pretty backwards. Hold on, this was the 2005 version, not the 1933 version, right? Oh, come on, Peter Jackson. If they're sacrificing Anne at all, can you at least give them reason enough to humanize them? Like, I don't know, they're scared of a giant ape and everything else on the island? Oh wait, didn't they kind of do that in Kong Skull Island? But at the very least, this movie makes Kong a lot more sympathetic and gentle, and the movie is more of a tragedy than a horror. Here, the CGI is actually helpful in making him more realistic as an ape. He is given a human-like face using Andy Serkis's facial expressions. Yeah, Gollum is King Kong. It's Peter Jackson, remember? But in this sense, it's so we can see what he's feeling, and he seems more human as a character with emotions rather than just an animal, making him much more relatable. And this is probably the best Beauty and the Beast relationship in any of the Kong movies that I've seen, though still one-sided romantically. For Anne, it's more platonic once she sees that he has no intention of harming her, and he is just a very confused big guy in a very strange world. Anne is also a lot smarter and less of a damsel in distress. Though she is still kidnapped, she does attempt to run away. It's not until she runs into not one, not two, but 3 T-Rexes that she realizes she is better off with Kong. And she tries to gain control of the situation, asserting herself when he gets too pushy and entertaining him with her dances. Most importantly, when Kong is put on display, she refuses to take part in the show. So when another girl is put in Anne's place for the show, Kong goes looking for her, thinking that she's been kidnapped, is in danger. And she willingly goes with him to calm him down. They even share a moment sliding across a frozen pond in Central Park. But even though she insists that he not be killed, he is killed. And this seems more like a "'twas Beauty that killed the Beast" moment than the original film. Because in the original, Kong was a raging monster to the end. But in 2005 version, Kong was truly calm, and that she had killed the beast inside of him. And in a way, his pursuit of her had led to him being killed, and it was a lot more tragic. Anime Guy 1101 says in the chat, "To be honest, the only actor I remember from any of these movies was Jack Black." Yeah, Jack Black played the director in the 2005 movie version, and honestly, I think that made the character a lot more self-centered than he was in the original. Because every time someone died, like, he died so the movie could be made. He died so the movie could be made. It's all for the movie. Like, wow, okay, priorities, dude. But yeah, these movies really show how relationships between two physically different people are perceived by society. On one hand, they are seen as horrifying. In the 1933 version, Anne was solely a victim, and that Kong's death was a triumph. In the 2005 version, Anne actually befriended Kong, but because no one else understood that, they shot him down and his death was a tragedy. In real life, people fear the other, anything different from them. In the classic monster movies, the monster is the frightening, rampaging beast that must be eradicated. By white men, if you'll notice. But our movie monsters, like Kong, have grown to be more sympathetic. Many of our villains, actually. Because we've come to realize that the world is not just black and white, black being perceived as evil and white as good. People are more complex than that. And they lash out because they're scared or angry or upset about something, or they just want to protect someone they love. Or because they were taken from their home and now in a place where they're treated like a monster or a sideshow attraction. So yeah, who's the real villain in this picture? Probably the movie director. I mean the character, of course. And Anime Guy 1101 says, "I was so glad when Jack Black's character lost his film." Yeah, he really didn't deserve a happy ending. Like, yeah. So, next time you watch the original King Kong, remember that it's a movie of its time, reflecting how people viewed otherness. Although the main lesson, I think, is that some things should be left alone. Leave the giant ape in his jungle. Which I think is a message that they convey in the Kong Skull Island in 2017. I'm not going to go into that so much because the plot is significantly different, and it's tying into the Godzilla reboot franchise that we have right now. So, any questions in the chat right now? Remember, if you want to join these streams in the future, you can pledge to the $10 tier, or you can pledge to the $5 tier if you just want to listen to the new episodes early. By Anime Guy 1101, any thoughts on the movie if you've seen it, or anything else you'd like to add? While you're thinking of that, I'm just going to announce what I'll be doing next. The last 2 episodes have been so serious, dealing with very dark issues. So the next time, we'll cover something that's a lot more lighthearted. I think we need something more uplifting in this trying time. And I will be covering the Netflix series inspired by fairy tales and a line of dolls from Mattel, Ever After High. Particularly some of the relationships that follow a Beauty and the Beast type dynamic. This episode will air on August 20th, earlier for patrons. And remember, you can join the patron tier at any time. Just click the Become a Patron button or follow the link in the description below. You can also support me by buying merchandise on Redbubble. Okay, so any questions or comments? Anything you'd like to add in the chat right now? Okay, so what do you think of the troupe where natives are portrayed as surprisingly up-to-date on technology, like in The Wild Thornberrys, where I first saw this troupe? Oh, you mean trope? Well, I'd say that's kind of pretty logical, because I know some cultures, well, some indigenous cultures, they will try to stick to their values, but they will still try to get with the times and connect with the outside world. I think it really depends on the culture, right? Obviously, there aren't a lot of indigenous troops that are still strictly holding on to all their traditionalist values, and they're not completely cut off from the world. At some point, they do grow. And I think it's really important if they're really curious, they should just do some research and see just how some indigenous cultures feel about joining the outside world. Just how modern do they want to be? And I think it's important to show that not all indigenous tribes are going to be the same. I do appreciate how in Kong Skull Island that that was the one time that the natives of Skull Island weren't presented as scary or vile. They were actually very quiet and peaceful. And also because they had the location in the South Pacific, they were actually played by actors of Asian descent rather than of African descent. So I think, I don't know about the culture itself, but it's probably the best version out of comparison of the natives in any of the Kong movies. Alright, and now Anime Guy 1101, have you heard of the Netflix series Troll Hunters? It has some different Beauty and the Beast relationships, friendship, family, and romantic ones. I have heard of it, I haven't watched it. I do have Netflix though, so maybe I'll check it out sometime. I'm still kind of in quarantine. Sadly, my date to go back to work was pushed, so at this point I'm kind of looking for work elsewhere. But, yeah, definitely looking for a show to binge, so I'll take that into consideration. Alright, so any more questions or comments? By the way, Oh, one last series I was wondering about. Fruit Baskets on Funimation. That has been suggested as an anime and something to cover, so I will definitely consider that too. I've looked at the preview, so I know what it's about. Okay, thank you for suggesting that as well. And I just want to make a note, even though these old movies clearly will have some themes and topics that are very harmful to today, you have to remember that they were products of their time, and that shouldn't stop you from enjoying them as they are. But just keep in mind that some things that were okay back then are not okay now. As long as you have that in mind, then it's okay to watch these really old movies. You'll just have to remember that's what they are. Of course, when stuff like that still happens today, then it's a problem. Alright, any last minute questions or comments? While you're thinking that, I'd like to thank my patrons again for their continuing support. It's been really helpful in this time of temporary unemployment. And I hope that I've been able to provide some little entertainment for those of you who are also in a situation like mine. Yeah, remember, we're all in this together. Alright, and nice closing sentiment. Looking forward to next time. Thank you, Anime Guy 1101. Okay, so next episode will be August 20th, earlier for patrons, so keep an eye out for your Gmail, and you'll get a link to the next live stream. And until then, treat others who are different from you with respect, and don't demonize something you don't understand. Also, don't go to secret islands full of dinosaurs and 50-foot gorillas. Just in general, bad idea. Alright, until next time.